Hello, and welcome to the mentorDINO YouTube channel. I'm your host, Caitlin Rossier. I am an architect and founder of mentorDINO. Each week, I interview amazing professionals in and around the architecture, engineering, and construction industry to help foster learning, growth, and inspiration in others. Thank you all to our current subscribers, and if you're new, we'd love to have you join our community. So hit subscribe. It really does help others be able to discover this resource. So let's dive in. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Welcome to the mentorDINO podcast. I would like to welcome Melody Fontenot, licensed architect and senior specifications writer at Conspectus Incorporated in Portland, Oregon. Thank you, Melody, for taking the time to speak with me today. If you don't mind, I'll let you do a full introduction of yourself so I don't miss anything. Can you tell my listeners what you're doing now and maybe a little bit on your story on how you became a spec writer?
Melody Fontenot, and I have been a specifier for quite a while. I was originally doing it at a firm right after I got licensed, and then I now work for a spec consultant. So I work for other architects as a spec consultant, and I will say that my spec journey definitely started while I was at a job. I was kind of in the process of taking my ARIES, and then my company approached me with a pamphlet and said, join CSI and get your CDT, and do you want to start writing specs? And I was like, that's a lot of letters. I have no idea what any of that means. Okay. So I joined CSI. And in the process of taking the CDT, they had a live training session taught by a local architect, CSI member. And he was amazing and so knowledgeable and so willing to share his information and knowledge with others. And it definitely really kind of just caught on, and he became a mentor of mine. And his name is Rick Lube, and he is now retired. But he was just a really wonderful guy who had a passion for teaching and engaging others with spec content. So it kind of lit a fire in me to do that. But I still was very resistant to go full spec for quite a while. I did want to stay fairly diverse in my skill group and not just, I was very concerned with being the old crotchety person in the corner that was, kind of siloed and doing specs and just specs. So when I was at a company in Oklahoma City, Reese Associates, for almost 13 years. And at that company, I did production, I did specs, I arranged all the lunch and learns and continuing education, because that somewhat ends up going hand in hand with the specs a lot, because all the reps. So, and then there was another specifier there, Steve Stovall, who was also a mentor and was I actually recently told him, I reached out to him and thanked him for being very open. And when I asked questions, I never felt silly or stupid or ridiculous. I was able to ask questions, and he very often would sometimes respond with, I don't know, let's find out together. And we would, pull up Google and start researching. So it was nice to have that kind of someone to foster that learning a little bit. And then when he moved away, I was the only specifier left, and my boss tasked me with just train the other project architects on how to do their own specs. Mm-hmm. And I resisted a little bit as far as trying to make it clear that not everyone is necessarily cut out to do the specs, because it does take a lot of detail. It's wordy. It's not the graphic, big picture, visionary thing that a lot of architects want to do. So it's mm-hmm. a much different mindset in what you're thinking of in the processes of going through that. So after I left Reese, I moved to Portland, Oregon from Oklahoma City. And I worked for a couple years at Deltec on master spec, updating content that other architects use. And it was a very interesting look behind the scenes and some interesting info on AIA and that whole process as well. And then I didn't feel like I was making a lot of headway there. So I was reaching out looking for some other opportunities. And I actually reached out to someone I had only met virtually at a virtual CSI Philly meeting. And he introduced me to my current boss, Dave Stutzman, who I already knew Dave's name through CSI. And, just he's been on a lot of committees and been influential in that organization. So I knew who Dave was, but I didn't think he knew who I was. Um, so we chatted and obviously that all went well, and I joined Conspectus in August of last year. And it has been very interesting kind of being a consultant rather than, like the prime architect and in the office with the architects as we're working on specs. And then it's also been interesting because at the beginning of 2023, we also released our internal software for others to subscribe to. So now we're somewhat a consultant and a product rep as far as kind of providing a software service. So we've been doing some marketing and interesting things as far as kind of rolling out that software for other people to subscribe to, and transitioning into things like customer service and dealing with subscribers and working with them and doing some training and all kinds of new things. So
what's on the service platform?
So Conspectus is basically a software platform that we have our own Conspectus Cloud Masters. We have a very robust system for editing and being able to connect the dots. One of my favorite features about Conspectus Cloud is we don't have any limit to project participants. So we encourage architect teams to invite consultants, product reps, owners, contractors to look these things over before they go out the door and really try to get them buttoned up and correct and communicate together and collaborate there. And so we have a comment feature, and in that comment feature I can click at and I can select any of the project participants, and then it sends them an email to a link to exactly where my comment is, and they can pop right into the spec and answer it. So I can ask like, hey, what's the basis of design for your metal panel? And they can put it right in there. And it serves as a place where you can document some of those design decisions as well. So we're really
does that all stay as like history?
Yes, the comments are all in there, and it's all cloud-based, so it's accessible to anyone on the team at any time. And it's really got a lot of amazing features. And we just released a new feature like 2 days ago where we can now we can compare two releases, and we can actually like export a PDF or a Word document that shows the tracked changes between one release and the next. So very, very handy, very nice.
Yeah.
Trying to make the process easier for everybody.
Now, would you use that feature after the set goes out if you need to issue an addendum or bulletin? Would that help track? Because I know typically it's you cross out for anything you delete and...
Yeah, basically the export strikes out anything removed and it bolds anything new. So it's very nice, because right now before we had that feature, we were exporting things and then we could use a macro. And I don't know how familiar you are with macros. That's not something I ever got into until... Not really.
Explain it.
It's a word-based thing. Oh my gosh, me explaining macros. Basically, it's something that we use in Word. It's a tool that will do things like it will compare two documents and spit out a tracked changes version.
Oh yeah, okay.
But we can write little bits of code, and so we can also do things like format documents. If there isn't a format set to a document, it won't maybe import into our software. So we have to have certain styles in place, and we can apply those styles using a macro to the Word file and then pop it into our program, and then we're able to do our edits and make choice selections and all those things within our software. So
yeah, no, that's awesome, because I know right now we have our own masters for the firm I work for, and it's right now I have found like OneNote is the easiest spot, so I don't have to jump into eSpec and double check something, because there's not a way to like link out and notify and cross check. So it's like keep your OneNote list and have it separated by division, so then I can just go in and update anything for whoever's helping on specs or if I have to do the specs, then cross check it. But
Yes. Yes. Yeah, we have it's awesome because if we have our comments, we can access a list of all the unresolved comments all at once and then links to the different sections where those comments are. And yeah, it's and I would say even the comparing of two different versions is even helpful for architects to see, between DD and CD, what did we change, or did
yeah.
that change get captured? Helpful tools like that. And we also have a portion in our software that is set up more for uniformat assembly. And it is to try to capture some early stage project information where maybe you don't have enough info yet to do a full blown master format section because you don't know the installation method, or you don't know some piece of it, or you have an alternate. So we actually have a place where we can kind of document some of those things and then start breaking those assemblies down by components and where those would be in the master format side, and we can create some links, and it's all very very high tech, and some of it is some features that are in there are things that not a lot of teams are taking advantage of yet, but I think they're kind of cutting edge and are something that's going to help streamline things down the road. But it's a little bit of a paradigm shift right now. So
Yeah.
we've basically got ways in there to do it the old way that all specifiers are kind of used to, and then we've got some other tools as well. So it's exciting stuff.
Now for that, is everybody using you guys as a consultant, or can people use that as, okay, I want to have the project architect do their own specs, but have it on there so it has those smart tools?
Yes. So essentially, when we contract with our architects, we can choose. So I have an architect that is my former employer, Reese, that they have a SpecLink account. So they allowed me access to that so that I could write their specs as a consultant using their software and their masters that they're used to. But most of the projects, we do try to steer people towards using the Conspectus Cloud software and masters. But we can import anyone's custom masters. So if they already have their Office masters and want to start from that, we can import all that and then edit it in the software. And yeah, what we did this year was basically now letting an architect can purchase their own subscription, to be able to set up their own firm masters in the cloud. And then we are very flexible in customizing as far as like we have a subscriber, but I still write most of their specs, but then they have the ability to publish it themselves, which you wouldn't have the ability to do if we were just consulting. Certain controls and things like that are a little different if architects get a subscription. So
yeah, interesting.
Yeah,
I'll definitely have to dive into it.
Yes,
play around.
Yes, I chatted with Bob about it a little bit, and I was like, I need to show you guys.
It's like, look at all these new things. Because
Yes.
I know for Bob, he's transitioning and trying to teach the project architects in his office.
Yes.
Let's backtrack to when you started doing that before you left the firm. How did that go? How do you start even trying to teach specs? Because sometimes it can be a lot to just wrap your hands around it.
It's a whole lot, and it's not something that you can easily teach in a short amount of time. And I would say, just like with a lot of other things in architecture, you somewhat do have to jump in and start doing it to really get the hang of it. But it is definitely a little bit more of a leap, I think, because we aren't taught anything about it in school. There's not usually a ton of people in the offices that are there to mentor or teach like Bob. So it is kind of something that is a big gap. And we were using SpecLink at my old office. So the basics of what I was trying to get across to people, I kind of did 2 sessions, and one of them was some basics of specs, and one of them was basics of the software, to try to, just give them a starting point. But again, it would be really hard, because then someone wouldn't touch it for 2 months, and then they'd come up and be like, where do I start again?
Yeah.
So, I tried to create a couple of little, guide sheets on, like, when you start a project, here's the first thing you do, step 1, step 2, step 3. But there are a lot of little nuance steps and pieces to it in there that are hard to just list out. Otherwise, your list gets too long and no one will read
Yeah.
it.
That's the hardest part, because I find whenever you're doing a QC review, so you're doing a quality check of supposed to be the drawings and the specs.
Hmm.
You're lucky if people have time to actually go through and give good feedback on the
Yes,
drawings for what's missing. And nobody ever looks at the specs. Like, it's almost guaranteed unless you have and it's
exactly.
like, it's a lot, and it can be giant manuals. I know in school you learn the spec divisions, so then you at least know certain numbers, and then sometimes you learn the different, like, the three parts. I'm
I
blanking
don't
on
feel
the names of them.
I don't feel like I even got that. I went back when I was doing my AREs and I got one handout in professional practice where they gave us like a 2-page spec. They were
Thing.
like, these are specs.
Yeah.
Moving
No, when you
on.
print, it's like that big plus the part
Yeah,
two of all the MEP. And it
exactly.
can be a lot.
Yeah,
Um,
it is. Compiled spec manuals can be like over 1,000 pages.
yeah.
And yeah, it can seem very daunting. And it is. It's wordy and concise isn't always my strong point. That's definitely something that I'm working on. That's one of CSI has 4 C's. I think it's correct, complete, concise, clear, and I didn't list them in the correct order, so I'm sure flack for
Eh,
that. But and then some people add the 5th C, coordinated. So yeah,
yeah.
concise is something that we definitely have aimed for with the Conspectus Cloud Masters, and it's been definitely a world of difference from. Master Spec is known for being very wordy and lengthy and a lot of content, and
Hmm.
it is an item you could have. So um, it's very lengthy, and so when you come into a section to edit it, when it starts at like a 70-page long section, it's like, oh my gosh, it's gonna
Yeah.
take me hours just to read through this. So definitely one of the tips that I gave my team when I was trying to train them on specs was, with specs you do start editing in part 2, because then you can more easily edit part 1 and 3 according to what you've selected in part 2, and there's
Hmm.
corresponding portions. So if you've got only rigid insulation and no batt insulation, then you don't need the batt insulation installation article. Oh my gosh, I picked quite a word to to use as that example, but so editing in part 2 is definitely a big tip, and I definitely encourage anyone who is interested in specs to join CSI and start there, because it's been a wonderful network and a great place to meet people who are like-minded and are willing to help out, and very um, most of them are very, yes, passionate about kind of engaging others with about specs and trying to bring more of us in.
Yeah. And I would say CSI is even great for non-spec writers.
It
Like,
is.
I'm not a full-on spec writer, and Bob pulled me into
Yeah,
CSI Pittsburgh really early on, and he taught me how to network and
yeah,
how to handle a room full of people I don't know. And that skill goes way beyond specs and architecture.
absolutely,
Um,
absolutely.
and you get to talk to the reps and just see what products are out there, what's new. I always find it easier to call somebody to ask a question whenever I've met them
Yes,
before or
totally.
something.
Yeah, you've established a connection, and then you can call them, and that's definitely something my mentor Rick in OKC would talk about. Being, he was like always looking for his go-to guy or go-to gal
Hmm.
for, like checking on, like, who's your glass expert, or who's your window person. And I always appreciated, there was an elevator rep in Oklahoma that I felt like I could call him and not just get, a sales pitch, but a knowledgeable and helpful guidance, right? Like, it
Yeah.
was more about guidance than selling me something. So
Yeah.
it's definitely, and there are a lot of those. I feel like a lot of those reps are found in CSI. You get those ones that are really invested in the industry and trying to help educate and make a difference, and not just make a
Yeah.
buck.
Not just try to sell you something. Like, it is a
Yes.
business. They do need to make something, but
But
let's help
yeah, a
us
lot of
get there first.
totally, and they're more about trying to provide a service and helping architects choose the right thing and word it the right way to get what they want in their project rather than, just, make the sale.
Yeah, exactly. Sticking with CSI and you getting pulled in early and doing the CDT, which I believe, if I get this right, construction document technician.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was like, there's so many C's in all of the
There
CSI
is. There
certifications.
is.
And you did that during your licensure exam process.
I did it right
Right
after.
after? Okay.
Yes. Yes. And I've heard some people say it's good to do at the same time or during, and I really found it interesting because I had just taken my ARI, I had just gotten licensed, and when I started studying for the CDT, I felt like I had so many aha moments where I was like, "Oh, like I
Now I
get it
get it.
now." The dots were connecting a little bit more than I felt like they had while I studied for the ARI, where it seems like almost like disjointed topics and um, not very cohesive. And the tests are definitely kind of different as far as like the AREs. I always felt like there was more than one right answer, and you were looking for the most correct answer.
Yeah.
Um, and with CSI exams, it's a little more by the book, but it's also a little bit removed from the real world is never the perfect world scenario. And a lot of their tests are based on that, trying to aim for that, textbook scenario and how would you respond in that case. And so it can be a little bit confusing because the real world, if you've had some experience in construction administration, can be.
Yeah. It's like, well, what's the actual scenario or what's the timeline? Are we trying to open tomorrow? So we
Yeah.
have to make some decisions that if we knew this a year ago, it would be
Yeah,
completely different.
absolutely. And I've been in projects where we knew it a year ago and we were still making decisions the night before they were pouring concrete. And,
Yep.
it's just, it's a bit of a roller coaster and it's always something different in construction. And, but yes, I do feel like having more of the technical knowledge and understanding of that contracts has definitely helped me, be able to respond a little better on my feet and kind of know which way to go. And a lot of writing specs is, I feel like, making some really well educated guesses.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's times that I also tell people if I don't fully know what to spec, maybe I haven't been given a basis of design, I will usually start by specing something, not top of the line, but higher end so that I can back down if I need to, right?
Yeah.
Was going through VE, but I try to leave some wiggle room if I don't know for sure. But it is very often up to some intuition and some making some guesses based on your experience and or asking others. That's definitely another thing that I encourage for anyone in the industry of any age, but particularly younger people, is to ask questions and try to have conversations with people who do have that experience to become a sponge and soak it all
Yeah.
up and learn from them.
And then there's two other exams CSI has. CCS, and I'm
Yes.
blanking on the other one, but it's 4 letters.
CCCA, and I
Haha.
have both of those.
See, all C's, so
Yes,
nobody can
I
blame me
know.
that I can't keep track of them. The CCS would be the spec writer one,
Yes,
right?
certified construction specifier.
And so what are they testing you in that? Are you going through and trying to pull together a spec? Are they quizzing you on the material and selections?
It's been a long while since I've taken that test. I have a coworker who just took that test, but they are looking. They don't necessarily have you put together a spec, but they're looking for some things like an understanding of the section format, which is
Mm-hmm.
the breakdown underneath part 1, 2, and 3. So
Yep.
they might ask you something like, where would quality assurance go? Which part, right? Like, so they'll ask you some things like that. Um, and having an understanding, definitely a pretty good understanding of where everything lies within that master format hierarchy system,
Mm-hmm.
and a little bit about some of the other, not too much about like uniformat and omni class, some of the other formats, but maybe a little bit about page format as well, which is how the page and the indentations and the spacings all lay out.
Yeah, I learned that the hard way on, this is all very particular. And I'm like, oh, okay. I didn't realize that that was such a.
Yes,
And
to
then
meet
learning how to format and
yes,
redo everything.
yeah, it's very interesting, and I am very glad we've moved beyond the days of just doing it all in Word and dealing with copies of files, and so
Yeah.
it's really nice to be on the cloud and away from some of that for sure. Although everything still gets printed to PDF for sure. That's definitely the next thing that we're trying to move architects past is you don't even need a PDF of these specs. They live in the cloud.
Yeah.
But everyone needs a PDF for that record set, and I get it. But we try to, I'm working on a project now where we have, some of the progress drawings uploaded to a Bluebeam session, and they have also uploaded the progress specs there so that we can try to collaborate. And I actually just learned that I can ping somebody in Bluebeam as well and send them a little alert that I have commented. So,
Yep.
I love all these little collaborative tools to try to help us bridge these gaps because it can be difficult. That's definitely something that's been interesting, kind of even when I was in an architectural office, I would say it was kind of hard to get the information. That's one of my biggest challenges that I face on the daily is getting information in a timely manner. And, a lot of times I can get a finished schedule, but there might be a lot of TBDs still in there. And so very often I was taking that QA set and filling in some blanks in my specs because I hadn't had some of that info yet. And very often on those QA drawings, there are still TBDs on there as well.
Yeah.
I'm like, how are we going to determine
Pick
these items? Yes. So, and I started to try to send messages to my team members to let them know, like, okay, well, I need to know by today if you want that to go out in tomorrow's spec issue.
Yeah.
So, it's definitely really difficult to try to keep up with that. And I've told some of my teams here, very often if they don't use a Bluebeam session, then how the process is, maybe I get 100% DD drawings. That's what I'm working on towards the 50% CD set. And then I'm not seeing any of the architect's drawings until they issue that 50% CD set. And I feel like my specs are not quite matching up because I didn't get to see anything since your 100% DD set. So I try to, make them aware of that and make sure we can close those gaps up. And, every once in a while reach out and be like, can I get an updated schedule? Or, make sure I've got the latest and greatest, or let me know if you change something over here. Don't forget about me.
Yeah. It's like trying to move as fast as you can, but then also updating everybody because the engineers, the spec writer, all these other people aren't in these design meetings with the owner all the time. Yeah. And so it's like, I always try to educate to always do the things first that affect other people.
Yes.
And make sure you get it done and delegate because then you're not holding anybody else back. Right. Take your own stuff and put it towards the end and make sure those people have something to do. Or I use that for me, for them. If I need to delegate to them, I want to make sure I give them the list like end of day today, if it's a task for tomorrow, so they have it whenever they get in. But I tell them like, if I email you at like 5, 6 o'clock, that does not mean do this right now unless it's a hot thing. And if it is, I'll probably just do it myself. But like, I'll send a list so you have a list for the next day or the morning, or send it Friday so they have it Monday.
Expectations and communication are huge in this industry. And I do feel like to me, as architects, our main job is to communicate. We are communicating the designer's own intent to the contractor via drawings and specs. And even though the specs are 50% of those contract document deliverables, we don't seem to spend 50% of our time or fee on them. But yeah, communicating to the team is such a big part of it. And my dad is an electrical engineer, so I grew up hearing him somewhat lament about last minute changes from the architect and And I decided to go into architecture school, and I actually went to a kind of a competing school in Oklahoma from where he went, but he still loves me anyway. But so we enjoy talking shop, but I definitely feel like I kind of almost had a little bit more of that in my mind all the time, where I'm like, I need to let my consultants know. That was
Yeah.
always my, like, if the owner was making a change, that was always forefront in my mind, was like, okay, I got to get this out to my consultants right now.
Yeah. Now, do you have like his sense of empathy now that you're on the consultant side and waiting for
Oh,
things
I
from
mean,
architects? You're like, I get it now.
I quickly somewhat, I feel like I realized once I was on the architecture side, I was like, Dad, it's not really the architect making the last minute decision. It's the owner making the
Hmm.
last minute decision, and it just flows down the pipeline. But yeah, I do feel like some architects are better than others about communicating those changes. And, very often it didn't seem like the owner really understood, we have to make a plan change. We have to
Hmm.
send that plan change to MEP, all these
All these
other
people.
people. They have to change. Then we have to get it back from them. Then we have to incorporate, make sure registers are in the right place or other things, like it's not as quick of a turnaround as you think it is. And if you try to push it, you just don't get as much coordination. And that's where the holes end up, and you get RFIs and
Yeah.
change orders and all those things that we try to avoid. So and that kind of goes back to those expectations. And I do feel like architects aren't the best at being clear about those expectations to owners, as far as some of those things, like, certain changes just take time to do well and correctly and well coordinated, and it's for your benefit to give us an extra 3 days or something to just do this.
Yeah. Make sure
You're
it's done
gonna,
right.
yes, rather than pay double for it in construction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for professionals that are those project architects that are trying to do the drawings and the specs?
I would say, if you can get your CDT, that is hugely helpful in just somewhat knowing kind of, it really does cover like those basic rules of how things work, and kind of just the pieces of the puzzle that really need to be in place to be able to maintain your quality for your project, and to have a basic understanding of even what you're looking for during construction administration. You're comparing documents and submittals that they give you to what the specs say. And if you don't really know how to interpret what those specs say, how are you checking, how are you confirming that
Yeah.
product actually meets the requirements? Because there's definitely a lot of things out there that are easy to, there's more than one underslab vapor barrier that's yellow, and you can mistake one for the other easily, and there's lawsuits about that all the time. But
Hmm.
there's just a lot of nuanced things in there. And I had a rep who I knew through CSI, and she called me and was like, hey, this submittal got denied for Perix. And I went, it's because your subcontractor sent us the wrong product in this middle. What they sent us was like a trowelable thing, and that's not what we wanted. And she looked at what they sent and went, well, you're right. Yep. I try to educate them, and it's just like there's so many. It was, I went through a project as well where there was kind of a lot of green staff on the construction management side, on the GC side, and they were sending us clear substitutions, not marking them as substitutions, just sending them through
Hmm.
like a submittal. And, it was really starting, and particularly on something like the air barrier section, I had already provided 7 choices of like, these are ones that we have pre-vetted. We know we're good
Yeah.
with these. You've got plenty to pick from, competition, and you're asking me for an 8th. And, it's just, a lot of those products are not apples to apples, and it can be very difficult to compare products if you don't know what you're looking at technically. So,
Hmm.
um, really, the more information you can find out about some of that stuff, I think the more beneficial it is to every architect's career. And it really is fascinating to me because, I have some clients who want to avoid certain companies due to just
Job site issues and
policy related things, even as far as what the company stands for. And yet in another one of their choices, it was, kind of picking a really over the top waterproofing that's urethane based, which is much worse for the environment than some of the other choices out there. And it's something that I just look at and think, gosh, it's like, it's so hard to focus. There's so many different things in architecture and pieces of the puzzle, and it's all moving parts that are constantly changing. And something that I actually tell people pretty often as well is, even if you think it probably changed. It probably changed since you learned it. It's you almost have to go into every project assuming nothing. You just have to somewhat, you do rely on those experiences and paths to base things on, but you can't take everything at face value and think it's going to be exactly the same on the next job, because companies change all the time. Products are no longer available. It's a lot to keep up with. So, creating a network of people you can kind of use to try to help you keep up with some of that stuff is a big help as well.
Yeah, definitely. I know it's always hard just to keep up with, as I usually see a project all the way to the end. I'm not back in the design side for a while, and then it's like, okay, what's going on? Like, everything that was on the list before is now discontinued. Let's start over.
Yeah, totally. And my very first architecture job was for kind of not really a sole proprietor, because obviously he had people like me that did drafting and stuff. But he was kind of, his own little one-man shop and did a lot of things regionally. And I didn't learn much about codes there, because he would kind of just turn it in, and the city would say, oh, you need to read that corridor. But he taught me some really great things, like he basically said, there's just no way you can know all this. So really, part of being a good architect is figuring out who you can contact, figure out the information you need, because it's a lot.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And moving on to you switching to being a full-time spec writer and stepping away from that architect role, what made that decision for you, or what were the stepping stones that you're like, I really like specs and I want to do that full time?
I feel like was resistant to it. And when I was making a move from Oklahoma to Oregon, that was when I found out through a CSI friend that there was a position open at Master Spec. And, I basically just went for it and ended up, I think, getting my foot in the door, partially because of my CSI certifications and having a friend there through CSI. So it was actually something I hadn't really thought about. I had been thinking about, as I moved, like, would I want to be an independent consultant and just do specs on my own, be my own boss? And then I thought, gosh, that seems like I'm not the type of person that really wants to necessarily run my own business and do the invoicing side of it and all those other kind of admin things that come along with the business ownership side. So, and then of course, moving from Oklahoma to Oregon, I was also like, it seems a little bit of a big step to try to go out on my own when I'm also changing regions, going to somewhere where I really don't know anyone, except for a couple of CSI friends that I've met at conferences before I moved here. But so that just didn't seem like the wisest of moves. And when the Master Spec opportunity opened up, I jumped on board and got it was very interesting to learn just about even styles of a Word document and how those control, that page format kind of stuff we talked about, and some of the things that I hadn't had as much time to dig into while I'm working on projects. And I really actually got to do some very focused research as I was updating sections there, and you'd really get to kind of dive into, a certain topic. So that was really, really cool. I really enjoyed being able to do the kind of the deep dive and really try to learn. Like I did some updates to the unit masonry section, and I got to, learn a whole lot about all the different organizations that are kind of around masonry and brick and things like that. And I cut that master section down from 72 pages to 66 pages. And I felt like that was a very big feat.
That is very big.
I streamlined some things. But it was just interesting, even in that process. Like, I talked to one manufacturer who said, yeah, you really don't need like the rubberized asphalt copper in there anymore, that flashing type. Nobody's really making it anymore. So just kind of being able to have some of that, it felt like more behind the scenes information about some products. And I was also in charge of some of the waterproofing sections. So I did some deep dives there, and I was amazed at how like I felt like I needed to call my friend from high school who's a chemistry teacher and ask her for a crash course, because it was, polyethyl, just, STPE, all the different chemistries and chemicals that go into the waterproofing and roofing membranes. And it was a lot. But it's very interesting to dig into some of that, and and then find even more of those little nuances, like even just the difference in things being called fiberglass or glass fiber. There's a difference. Just some of that stuff was very interesting. Some of those little tiny nuances, and being exposed to that whole process of how those documents are updated, and how the software works and all that. And then Conspectus, I did really want to keep doing specs, and Conspectus has a reputation that was just, like they seemed like the gold standard of spec companies. And they just seemed like it was all these people who I'd heard of through CSI that are working together. And then I was like, oh, and they have their own software. That's just super cool. And I will say, I feel like I am now, like, I've had my first ever like proactive boss. I know it's really hard in business. You of course, bosses have to be proactive and have forethought and to stay in business. But I always felt like, especially at architecture firms, there's more reacting going on in management than thinking ahead. And it is hard to balance those two things, and keep everybody on track, but then moving forward somewhere where to be going, and not just kind of standing still and doing things the way you've always done them. I do think architecture in general, this industry gets really hung up on that. Contractors too, right? Like, they'll just add more costs to a bid if it's something they're not as familiar with, sort of that unknown factor. And even that was something I kind of learned at the master spec portion of my career was, how hard it is for like a new and innovative material to get to market. If you want a UL test, that's tens of thousands of dollars, right? Like, so to get listed and do all those tests that need to be done, it's a long, arduous track. So it's really amazing how many pieces of the puzzle there are. And honestly, some days I'm amazed that buildings get built at all, right? I'm like,
and new products come in because of that barrier, and then it's a long lead time for them, because they're trying to at least get on the spec. But then even the specs and the design may take years depending on the size of the project, and then by the time they're actually built, if they're more of a last finished material, they're not going in until the very end. So definitely. I know you've mentioned a lot about CSI and your involvement. Can you explain a little bit more of what roles you've had within CSI and how that's really affected who you are today?
Yeah. So I think I joined in, oh my gosh, it was 2006. So I've been a member of CSI for 17 years now. And I had not been in that long. I basically started going to those CDT classes, and I started going to some of the meetings, and then I was approached and asked to do something with, like a student liaison role. And then the next year they asked me to be a director on the board. And then maybe the next year I got a call asking if I wanted to be the chapter president. And I was like, whoa, what an honor. And then I sort of figured out, I was like, oh, nobody else wanted to do this. Like, they were looking for some fresh blood. I see what's going on. But I did. I took them up on that opportunity, and I was the Oklahoma City chapter president. And then actually, that was supposed to be a 1-year term, but my president-elect ended up not being able to renew his membership, and this was kind of right around the 2008 downturn, where the economy tanked and there was just a lot of, kind of extra economic things going on. So I agreed to serve a second year. And one of the reasons I agreed to serve that second year as president was because they sent the president and president-elect to the CSI conference. And they had changed the timing of the conference. So my first year, there was no conference. And the second year, it was going to be in Chicago. And I had never been to Chicago. And as an architect, of course, I was like, I want to go to Chicago.
Yeah.
I'm already doing this. I'll do this for a little bit longer so I can get a trip to Chicago out of it. And it was really cool. Definitely, like, I've gone to a lot of the CSI conventions and very much enjoyed the networking and the education and just, being with like-minded other nerdy specifiers. But so, after I served as Oklahoma City chapter president, I was still very involved and on that board as a director for many years. And I was, I think, probably way too many different committee chairs as well. So I did a lot of different little wearing of hats in that chapter. And then I did end up serving as the South Central Region president after kind of going up a couple other ranks in the South Central. And that was basically all of the chapters in Oklahoma and Texas. And the region level was a little bit more political feeling. It felt like a little bit more people management type of stuff. And it was like, I was like, oh, okay. So I feel like I learned some diplomacy while I was doing some of those leadership things. And just, trying to kind of talk through people having differing opinions or ways they think we should be doing things. So that was very eye-opening, and I feel like definitely helpful to, just my day-to-day as an architect as well. And then when I moved to Portland, as I mentioned, I was already familiar with a couple of people in the Portland chapter, and it was very, very nice to be like, I think the first event I walked into at Portland, there might've been 10 people, and I think I knew 5 or 6 of them. And I was like,
that's always so nice.
Yeah. So that was really nice to kind of have a space that already felt friendly and welcoming to come to in a new city where I really didn't know anyone else. And then obviously I moved here in 2019, which is like 9 months before the pandemic started. So it's even been difficult to meet a lot of people because there just weren't as many events. And but I jumped right onto the Portland board and I served as a director. And I am currently the outreach chair, and I handle all of our social media for CSI Portland. And I also handle all of the AIA certificates. So in our chapter, we have the wonderful Sharice Lakeside, who teaches a CDT study session twice a year. And it is a really, really excellent session. She's got just a ton of real world examples that are like helpful in making the, content that can be a little dry if it's presented in a certain way. But she's got all these really engaging examples that really make it connect and like hit a little bit differently than some of the other trainings that I've seen. So a couple of years ago, I worked very hard to get all of those CDT study sessions listed for AIA HSW credit. So now if you take Sharice's class, you can get up to 18 HSW hours. And so I handle all of the reporting and all of the certificates for those classes twice a year, as well as like all of our CSI Portland meetings. And then at the institute level, I am on the nominating committee for the second year. Last year was the first year I did that, and it was very interesting. We got to interview basically the candidates, so we'll sit and serve on the CSI institute level board. And I am also on CSI's DE&I task force, which was charged with basically providing like some a business case for DE&I and CSI, which we put together like with the help of a consultant, and we presented some information on that at CSI's conference in October. So still kind of hanging tight to see what's next for that group. I am also Portland has a Jedi committee. So I've been very active in that committee as well. And actually it's been really interesting because through that committee, Charisse ended up connecting me with someone named Rachel Nava, who's a CSI member in Chicago. And we ended up becoming good friends just via chatting, about some of these efforts and what our chapters were doing. And then her husband ended up coming to work for Conspectus. And it's just one of those, like, there's so many little connections and mutual things that happen in this industry. It is very close in the industry where, you definitely don't want to burn any bridges. But so, yeah, now I'm not really officially on the CSI Portland board, but I'm definitely very, very involved and still kind of in charge of some committees and helping out wherever I can. And I'm also always the unofficial photographer wherever. I just take pictures, so I'm always that person.
Hey, you always need that person.
Right.
Make sure you capture everything.
Right. And so if I'm not going to be there, I'm like, hey, take some pictures.
Yeah. That DEI report would be very interesting to look at because I know it's more locally in Pittsburgh, but I've found more spec writers are the more seasoned architects about to retire. I don't see as many young professionals going into spec writing. I think I don't know if it's just because we're not taught specs at all in architecture school to understand what it is, or the fear of being pigeonholed for some reason.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different factors. And I think several years ago, so in NAAB that accredits the architecture colleges, they used to have one line that mentioned specs in their curriculum. They removed it several years ago. So there's no mention of specs. There's no requirement for accredited architecture schools to teach anything about this. And I do think that is a huge reason. It's like people just don't even know really what it's all about. And then, yes, if you're in a small firm, you're so busy. It's hard to find time, and it's hard to find people who have, already had the knowledge to pass it down. And succession is one of those other difficult things in our industry that doesn't always happen the way that it should, as far as that passing of knowledge down. And that is definitely something that I really appreciate about Conspectus, is that we are all about educating and really big on transparency and trying to share our knowledge and help make specs and the spec community better. That's our goal.
It's an awesome goal. I've been debating on how I can fold specs into the courses I provide, because that's the part I'm missing. And how to go through specs, tell the story. The best way you learn between being on site and learning something is learning to be able to teach. So that's all my goals for 2024. Nice. Is I will have a mini spec course, so at least people can get an understanding of specs, jump in, understand. I may not be able to go into the details on the difference between fiberglass and glass fiber, but I'm going to look it up after our conversation, because now I'm curious. But do you have any?
Yeah, I love that. I watched your What an Architect Does and DD, and you mentioned specs at DD's, and I was like, thank you.
I did specs.
Yes, and don't leave it like 1 week before your CDs are going out. CDs need, those specs need a little bit more time and a little bit more love.
It's like you shouldn't wait till the QC to actually review things. That should be like, nobody has time. That's a spot check. You need to do detailed reviews of everything on the project as you go, or else you're going to get screwed, and then you're going to get even more screwed in CA.
And specs is definitely an ongoing learning thing. I think all of architecture is, but that is something that has been one of my personal kind of goals, is to try to make it seem a little less intimidating and a little less boring. It's not a snooze fest. We definitely have our fun, for sure. So it's something that has been a niche and has served me very well. And it definitely, I think I did finally kind of just come to the realization that I was like, I'm not really a vision and big picture person. I'm a detail. I'm a pinpointer and a dot connector. And this is where I fit in really well in this industry and can contribute in a valuable way.
Yeah, definitely. Do you have any advice for others that are leading their specifications on their projects?
I would say definitely just don't make assumptions and do give it time. Don't leave it till the end.
Hmm.
Give it time, check in early and often, and try to, like I said, I feel like the more you can kind of understand and dig into it, the more it really will help you maintain that level of quality in your final projects. If you don't know what performance you need, it's hard to convey that to anyone else. So how would you expect for them to, to provide that? So
Yeah. And do you have
dive.
any advice for young professionals getting involved in CSI?
I would say
How to
it
get
is
started?
really about it really is sometimes also about not just asking questions. And I feel like as a specifier, curiosity is definitely important, but I also have come to figure out like sort of how to ask the questions, like
Hmm.
how to ask a question in a way that's going to get me the answer I need, but also somewhat finding the people to ask the questions too, because there are definitely places, there's certain office cultures that just aren't quite as conducive to asking questions. So if it's not something that you're finding in your office, seek it outside of your office.
Hmm.
Try to find that mentor and someone that will help you and is willing to just, talk through some stuff. Cause I do feel like talking through things is so much more valuable than even reading it off a website or, but like you said, just even picking
Yeah.
up the phone, having a couple minute conversation is even better than, a series of back and forth emails. And I very often hesitate to pick up the phone. It's not my favorite form of communication. I am a very wordy person and I like to have the email and I'm going to refer to it later and I'm going to search for
Yeah.
it. I've got keywords and, um, but also, yeah, I definitely realize like sometimes a phone call is really just needed to cut through some of that confusion
Hmm.
because in writing it can be more confusing. It really is amazing how much it can help just to have that one-on-one convo and get to the heart of it and be direct and like cut through some of
Yeah,
the fluff, right?
exactly. Or if they start using, as a young architect, it's really hard to get used to all the different acronyms. And then as
Yes.
soon as you jump into particular products, each one of those product
Oh,
reps
that.
and subs are going to
Yes.
have their own acronyms. And you're like, what? It's like, okay, what masonry can be the
Yeah.
SMNO. And so
Yes.
it's like, I always have to, I know the letters, but I always have to relook them up. But I know I need to look them up. It's not something I can
Yeah.
memorize. Pass the exam. I
Yeah.
think I knew it for the Aries. And then after that, I was like, okay, I'm not keeping that to mental capacity. No,
Yeah.
definitely
Right. There's
helpful.
too many lists. Yes. I did a project with a guy that could spout off the ASTMs and I was like, wow. I don't
It's
know that
like,
I'll be there. I mean, I got E84 down. That one's a pretty solid like fire test, right? Like, but
yeah.
it's just, yeah, there's only so much our brains can handle. And I definitely refer to guides and I keep spreadsheets to try to kind of, keep my product comparison info straight and, find resources. And I do rely on a lot of resources I find online, but also try to take those with a grain of salt and check what
Hmm.
those sources are coming from. Because sometimes an article can look like it's not from a manufacturer and it looks a little more kind of, you know, outsider opinion. And then you're like, oh, some of this sounds like an ad, right? Like,
Yeah.
so it's interesting to kind of try to sift through the info we find. And of course with AI coming into play, we've been doing some just fun testing and querying of some of these AI engines to see what we get, and I'm always like, oh no, that's not right.
Always good to check it.
Yes, and that's kind of what it boils down to. It's like it can be a helpful tool, but you do still need some human interaction to do that QA and make sure the due diligence and double checking has been done. Very important.
Yep. And I always like to wrap up my conversations with, do you have any advice for those young professionals that are just starting their careers?
I would say be curious. Just that curiosity will lead you to, I feel like, what ends up, it can be really hard to find like a fit in a firm or what exactly it is in this field because there's so many different ways you can go in architecture. And the more you're curious, the more you can try out because sometimes it may not seem like a good fit until you dip the toe in, and then you
Mm-hmm.
start thinking like, oh, this is like a little different than I thought. So be curious and ask questions. And it can be daunting to ask those questions when you're young and you feel like you don't want anyone to know that you don't know. But I like to tell people all the time that none of us really know. We are all just kind of flying by the seat of our pants and making it up as we go to the best of our ability. I do think architects can be pretty good at, we're trying to sell projects to owners, and sometimes maybe we sell a little to ourselves too. But I'm definitely a big fan of, sometimes I struggle with architects that have a big ego, and I am a big fan of people who are more substance than show and really, know their stuff and aren't just trying to pass it off or paint a pretty picture. But I was always that person telling our rendering artist, where's the downspout? Where's the condensing unit? Like all the real world stuff that's
The
not
stuff
in there.
you need. Yeah.
And it's, again, kind of misleading an owner with expectations that you're going to have this gorgeous building with not a downspout on it, So like I'm an authentic, like I would rather. I got in trouble at one of my jobs for saying I would have to check the code to a doctor, and the person I was working with said, never tell a doctor no. And I thought, well, first of all, I didn't really tell the doctor no, but also I am not a yes person that is going to say, sure, we can do that, and then come back and go, oh, we checked the code and we can't do that.
Yep.
That to me seems less responsible than being forthright and saying, I'm not sure. I'm going to have to check on that and get back to you.
Yep.
So I definitely have tried to always kind of lead with that authenticity, and I'm not going to present like I know something that I don't. I don't feel like that benefits anyone. So be real, stay curious, ask questions.
Yeah, definitely. I'm always afraid of that coming back and saying, well, just kidding. We can't do that.
Right. Nobody wants to have that conversation ever. And for feedback, that's a good one too. I will say that has not always been my strong point, but asking for feedback can be extremely helpful. And if you have feedback to give someone, ask them if they want some feedback before you give it. That can also be helpful. I am someone who likes to help people, and sometimes I realize that my help may have come off as unsolicited advice, which no one really wants. So I try to be a little more aware. Sure, someone actually wants my input before I force it upon them.
Yeah. Or timing. I usually just check to make sure they just didn't get out of a meeting that they got yelled at for the last hour. So then they're just emotionally destroyed. Like, it's like, hey, I want to give you some advice on this. Like, let me know when's a good time we can sit down. And if it's like after lunch, that's fine. And they'll have the right headspace for it.
Totally. Yes. I love that.
All right. But thank you, Melody, so much for talking to me today. I hope you inspired so many people who are curious about specs to learn more or join CSI so they can learn product reps, materials, and more about CSI and spec writing. So
it's a magical world, and magic really happens outside of your comfort zone. So come join us.
I hope you enjoyed our discussion today. Check out the description below for any resources, links, and contact information we discussed. Did you like the conversation today? Is there something you'd like to know more about or a topic I should cover? Leave me a comment below and I will see what I can do to best answer your questions. And if you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel. It does really help others be able to find this resource to have larger conversations. So leave me a comment and subscribe. I really appreciate your support.